going, everybody? So you have a fun review today as we're talking Time Cut. As we're winding down towards the conclusion of spooky movie season, I figured why not conclude things with one more new horror film from Netflix, because I am a sucker for horror films, particularly of the slasher variety. When Lucy accidentally finds a time machine, she travels back to 2003, the year her sister was murdered by a serial killer, leading her to be torn whether to save her sister she never knew and stopping the killer, even if it may result in completely altering her future existence. Among the vast variety of different subgenres within horror, slasher is one of my personal favorites, so that did play a large part into my intrigue about Time Cut, along with the other thing. Let's just get it off our chest now. Let's talk about it now, because I'm going to be talking about it probably several times throughout the review anyway. Time Cut has a very similar plot to Totally Killer, a slasher that came out on Prime Video last year starring Kiernan Shipka. Both of these films involve someone going back in time and saving their loved one. Totally Killer, they were going back in time and saving their mom and her friends. Here in Time Cut, they're going back in time and saving her sister and their friends. The killer's masks even are eerily similar designs. It's a really tricky situation. Technically, Time Cut was filmed first back in 2021, but Totally Killer came out last year, so that is why so many people think that they're basically the exact same movie and they're ripping off each other. Regardless of the similarities, it is interesting seeing this sort of subgenre of freaky It's a Wonderful Knife and the Happy Death Day films expand, especially when you realize just how connected the majority of these films are. Michael Kennedy co-wrote or wrote the majority of these movies, and Christopher Landon, who is the director and writer on the Happy Death Day films, he's a producer on Time Cut. True detail of what makes or breaks the majority of these sci-fi tinged slashers is the overall concept at hand. And I have to admit, I felt incredibly old, the realization when Lucy goes back to 2003, that all these different things that I grew up on now are considered nostalgic. It was 20 years ago now. Sporadically, Time Cut does a solid job evoking the era when Lucy gets sent back, and the novelty of having to adapt to the culture shock. You've got your low-rise jeans, oversized jerseys, Ed Hardy t-shirts, plus the soundtrack here. I'm a little biased, of course, because I grew up in that era, but the soundtrack here is pretty fire. From the very opening of the movie being What's Love by Fat Joe, then you have Hilary Duff songs, Vanessa Carlton, Avril Lavigne, and that's besides all the other fun little things you'll notice in the background. For example, Summer has a huge Buffy the Vampire Slayer poster in her room. As for the film as a whole, I don't think it captures the feeling of the era well throughout the entire film. You only feel in a handful of sequences and the occasional joke here and there. However, those sequences do stand out when they are emphasized. It's actually kind of perfect that Time Cut is a Netflix film, since if you're a chronic Netflix watcher, the two leads of this are stars in other big Netflix shows. Madison Bailey is from Outer Banks, and then Antonia Gentry is from Ginny and Georgia. Both of these shows I have watched and I have enjoyed to various degrees, but I'm not caught up to date with either of them because they're splitting these seasons into two parts now, so part 2 hasn't even come out yet. I've said this before, but I'm really not a big fan of all these different shows that Netflix decides to break up into multiple parts. The bond that's formed between Lucy and Summer has its fair share of solid moments throughout. Lucy almost intentionally is kind of a tough character to latch onto in the beginning. It's evident that she's smart with an internship at NASA, but she's incredibly lonely and emotionally detached, inflicted about her future with these murders in the past having an effect on her, her parents, and the town as a whole. Once Lucy gets to meet her long-lost sister she never knew, there's an inherent sweetness to the bond that they create with one another throughout the story. Discovering who Summer was as a person that, funny enough, is basically the complete opposite of her. She's outgoing, popular, and isn't all that smart, having others like Quinn do her homework for her. Even occasionally, this friendship that's formed between Lucy and Summer's friend Quinn has some good moments too. A lot of the humor and banter between them is your usual time travel fare, joking about things that'll happen in the future, technology, joking about Twitter and modems being incredibly loud. If there's one thing that sells the film well, it's these three and the moral questions at play centered around time travel. The contemplation whether you should try and save somebody if you know they're going to die in a few days, but if you do try and save that person, you could cause a paradox, making things way worse for you in the process or the others around you. Frustratingly, many of those questions of morality around time travel shenanigans get thrown out the window pretty early on, because Lucy starts telling pretty much everybody that she's from the future. And I'd say the effects of what they do trying to stop the Sweetly slasher don't amount to much in the end. Sadly, one of the weakest parts of Time Cut, and it's something that hurts me because of how much I love the slasher genre and I want to see more horror icons being created, the Sweetly slasher is one of the worst parts of Time Cut in my opinion. Even if you ignore how similar their look is to the Sweet 16 killer from Totally Killer, the killer is just incredibly generic. Nothing they do stands out or is memorable. The few kills that the the film does feel like any effort was put in from a creative perspective. Something that's a real shame because there are so many cool locations throughout, whether that be the mall, a boat, or this hay shed that we see a couple times throughout the film. There's just never much attempt to build suspense or excitement around those set pieces. I don't want to make it seem like I'm making excuses for the movie, but the movie was filmed back in 2021 during the heart of the pandemic, so I feel like that's a major contributor to why these sequences feel so lackluster and empty from a creative sense and a literal sense, because there are so many different sequences in here, but there's nobody around. The mall sequence outside of 3 or 4 people is incredibly empty. The boat has 1 or 2 people on it. And as somebody that's a big fan of horror and slashers, the kills are one of the things that you want to get most excited about for these movies, and they are incredibly lackluster. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Most of the time, the kills the Sweetly Slasher does are cut away and you barely see anything but the aftermath with very little blood. There's one scene in particular where it seemed like we're going to get to see something pretty cool, and the killer is pressing a girl's face towards the edge of an escalator, and then we see nothing of it because it cuts away. That goes for the final confrontation between Lucy and the Sweetly Slasher. In most instances, the final showdown between the final girl and the killer is supposed to be one of the most exhilarating parts of the movie, and it feels like this movie was kind of just trying to get to the end and speed through it all with how quickly it's resolved. And that leads me into another thing I found kind of frustrating about Time Cut by and large. Outside of Summer and Quinn, the movie hardly makes an attempt to build any depth around the various other characters, some of which Lucy tries to stop from being murdered. In most instances, there is no character development, or it's very surface level. There is a little bit of an attempt to get to see what Lucy's parents were like 20 years ago, how different they were with her versus her sister, and how it plays into how Lucy was raised, which was interesting, but like I said, very surface level information. Due to the lack of depth, when some of these characters are hunted, you pretty much feel nothing. You aren't sad, you aren't happy, you kind of are just introduced to these people, have no idea who the hell they are in the most part, and then they're killed and you immediately forget afterwards. Though I don't want to compare the two too much, Totally Killer did a much better job in my opinion with the supporting characters. Totally Killer, they did a pretty good job having the victims develop some character and have some humor to them and personality before they're killed. In Time Cut, I would be surprised if people even remember the names of these people that are killed, because you're introduced to them and then they're killed almost immediately. You basically get no time to know who the hell they are. Debatably, there is some level of mystery at play in Time Cut on who exactly the killer is, the Sweetly Slasher, because they were someone that was never caught all those years ago, but it feels very inconsequential, and to be honest, if you're someone that's paying attention, you probably could guess who exactly the killer is going to be in the first 15-20 minutes of the movie. And in a similar way to the other films I listed off earlier, these sci-fi slashers like Happy Death Day, Freaky, It's a Wonderful Life, there is of course some suspension of disbelief to be had for the concept to work. Like in this movie, Lucy is trying to get a key card from her dad to break into a secret government building that houses materials to fuel this time machine in 2003. But more so, it's just wild to me how this time machine is introduced in the film in general. It's just stashed away in a barn in the town that anyone could stumble upon, and conveniently, it's set to a few days before Lucy's sister dies for her to walk in and find it. Surely there had to have been a better way to incorporate the time machine into the story than that, right? While I think there's some solid merit to Time Cut and how it portrays the growth of a bond between sisters born in different eras who never met, it's definitely on the weaker side when it comes to the horror sci-fi elements. There's definitely some charm in the concept. I just wish many of those concepts it was trying to convey were explored in better depth. Admittedly, my experience here probably was hindered a little bit because I had seen Totally Killer and I actually quite liked Totally Killer. And if you enjoy Totally Killer, I think you're going to enjoy to some degree this movie, partially because they have very similar aspects. If I had to compare the two, I do think Totally Killer in general is just a far better experience. I'll be very intrigued if mileage will vary on if you have seen Time Cut and you haven't seen Totally Killer, and all the other people in the comment section, if you've seen Totally Killer as well and then watched Time Cut. I'd love to know your thoughts about it, as far as, do you like both of these films? Do you like one more than the other? Do you feel like they are crazy similar to the point where somebody should be in a lawsuit somewhere getting sued for plagiarism? Once you get a chance to check out Time Cut, make sure you share your thoughts down below. What'd you think of the film? Did you like the film? Did you not like the film? As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the videos. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so you update reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. Till next time, I'll see you guys later.